Of course I could have become something else. Of course I could have become a doctor, like my father. Of course I could have become a philosopher, because I studied philosophy. Of course I could have become an art historian, because I loved history of art. Of course I could have become an architect, because for some time I built houses in my mind and made drawings of houses and floor plans of houses and drafted 100 houses. I think I was 14 or 15 years old. And I figured I could have become a priest because I was very impressed by some priests and by what they did and how they did it. But most of everything, I could have become a painter. Actually, for a long time in my life, I did not want anything else than to become a painter. Because art, especially paintings, more than sculptures, but paintings were almost the most holy thing I knew when I was growing up. And I loved museums and I loved paintings. They were the better world than our world. So I should have become a painter. And I was on the right track. But then I encountered cinema in the Cinematheque in Paris, where I went every night, basically only because my room was too cold and it was unheated. I had to be somewhere warm. But I got to know the history of cinema, and I saw so many films in such a short time that I couldn't but realize that was a better option than painting. For me, that was a more amazing option, and I had never considered it before. In the Germany of the 50s and 60s, becoming a film director was out of the question. It was not on the agenda. There was no school and there was no culture of cinema. Becoming a film director was just not in the cards. It never crossed my mind until I sat in the Cinematheque every night for a year, and in the afternoon and late at night, and I saw 1,000 films, and I realized that was also a profession. And that profession was more complex and more suited to me than painting, because it was all of what I had once wanted to become, an architect, not to talk about music, a priest, a philosopher, a painter. Cinema was all of it rolled into one thing. It slowly dawned on me when I saw all these movies, and Henri Langlois, the director of the Cinematheque, told before each film in 5 minutes, told the context of the film, the culture it was from, the period it was from. So I learned about film history in that 1 year also. So out of a sudden, I got totally sidetracked, and painting, although I was studying it and doing it in Paris, was taken second rank, and I was full of the idea that cinema was the more complete version of painting. It was still about framing, which was such an important act for me in painting. It was still about framing, but what happened in the frame was so rich and so of endless variations and options. So it did sidetrack me in the end from painting, and it became everything I ever wanted to be. And it became a tool not only to have a profession and to do all these things I like to do, but had to be involved with music and architecture and with people and writing and acting and all of it. But it also was in a fantastic way to learn more about the world and learn more about how other people see the world and how rich the options were. And in the end, I'm still doing every film as if it was my first one, as if it allowed me to understand the world for the first time. And movies are incredible journeys into unknown territory. And I've always wanted to do a film because I didn't quite know how to do it. Perfect Days even more so. I didn't know how to make a movie in Japan. How would I? I've shot a little bit in Japan, but it was never made a film. A whole film in Japan in Japanese. I had no idea how to do it. And for me, that is a fantastic way to start a film, that you have no idea how to do it. And basically that's what I'm hoping for, and that's what attracts me to continuing to make movies, because I don't know how. I don't know how to do it. If I knew how to do it, I wouldn't want to make that movie, because if I knew how beforehand how to do a certain film, why should I want to do it? It's already done. I like to make movies because I do not know how to do them, and I do not know enough about the subject, and I do not know enough about Hirayama. I do not know enough about such a simple life, and I do not know enough about modesty, and I do not know enough about giving so much attention to everything. So it was a great reason to make Perfect Days and to discover the universe of Hirayama and to submerge into a world that was just as new to me as it was to every viewer, hopefully. Because that's also my conviction, that no audience can see something or can learn something or can like something that you yourself didn't learn or like. If you didn't learn to like it, or if you didn't learn how to move in a certain world, how should an audience move into it? So, film is one of the few professions that allows you to have a very precise experience and to become richer through that experience and to pass on that experience. It's not just a result. You pass on a process. It's like films always come with their own manual. Each film also makes you understand how to see it. It's not that that every film can be seen in the same way. Every film has its own way to be seen. And it shows this own way in its grammar. So, I think I like to continue making movies because each movie is a learning process. Each movie has to find how it wants to be told. It finds its own grammar. It uses its own vocabulary. It's a new language. And you cannot apply that language on any other film. You cannot. You have to start from scratch. And if you don't start from scratch, if you use too much experience, there's something missing, and the audience will not follow you, or you're not able to involve them as much because you're showing something ready-made. And if a film is ready-made, well, then you must not be disappointed if the audience looks at it as ready-made. And then it's a product. And I do not look at a film as a product. I look at it as an experience and a process. And I'm happy that it's been able to remain that way for me. And the process is something I can pass on. The film shows its process. And showing its process, the audience is able to enter into the process and become part of the process. So I never liked movies that didn't show their process. I never liked movies that were sort of closed systems. You had to see what they showed you. There was no reading between the lines. What you see is what you get. I love that the audience is taken along on the process and sees the way we see while we make it, the way the actor sees, cameraman sees, the crew sees. I'm totally convinced that everybody on the set influences a movie. If the electricians have no interest in the film whatsoever, it shows. If the sound man is bored by recording the sound, you can hear it. Everybody on the set, the actors, not only the actors, but everybody, the makeup people, the people who take care of the props, as you call them, the accessories, the architecture, the colors of the walls. If all these people influence the way an audience sees the film, and their presence influences. And so if they're not interested, if they don't want to know how it's going on and what happens the next day, the audience feels it. They lose interest. Or they start seeing it as a product, not as a process. And that is such a huge different thing. If a film is a product, you see the product. If the film is a process, you enter it. And Perfect Days was really a process. It remained a process till the last day of shooting. And you see it in the last shot of the film. Hirayama listening to a song. And at that moment in the film, you know what it is. If he's listened to a lot of songs in the course of the film. So you know what it is. He puts in a cassette and then he listens. But out of a sudden, he shows you something altogether different. He shows you how to listen to a song as if it was the first time in his life. And Nina Simone, of course, was very helpful because you cannot help than being taken in by what she sings and by how she sings it. So I'm Feeling Good was listened to by Hirayama as if he had never listened to a song before. And he hears every word, and he becomes every word, and he becomes the listener. And the audience become the listeners. And that's what I mean by process. You involve them in the process. You've seen Hirayama play lots of songs with his cassettes, but you've never really seen him listen. And out of a sudden, in the last shot of the film, he shows you what that is. And that's what I call the difference between a product and a process. And I'm usually getting very quickly bored by films that are strictly a product, because then I'm a consumer. And being a consumer can be fun, and sometimes you like to consume, and sometimes it's a good thing to just consume. But in the end, it doesn't need me. Consuming is an automatic thing. But being involved in a process is involving you with your body and your soul. And Hirayama, in the last scene of the film, really involves us. So that's what I meant. Until the very last shot of the film, it is a process. You learn about cleaning a toilet, and then you learn about that it's not always the same, and then you learn that never anything is the same. You slowly learn that in the film. Everything is always happening for the first time. And that's the way Hirayama lives. That's the way he reads his books. He doesn't have 10 books that he reads at the same time. He reads one book, and he puts it back on the shelf and he goes and buys a new one. Everything happens once for him. And that's such a secret today, because we're all so much entered the life of consuming. We've all so much entered the world of products that to see a man who is refusing to be part of that world, but who's doing everything for the first time and enjoys little things and respects them and knows how unique they are, and who is aware of the kohlrabies as something that only happens once in the whole universe. And he might be the only viewer. That awareness is what I really love about Perfect Things, and that's why I think it really can engage in a contemporary audience, because it takes them out of the prison of being consumers. It's a terrible prison. And it's basically the prison we live in. But there's ways out, and Hirayama has found one, and he's able to show us how he got out of the prison. And that's what makes his life so unique and important. And that's why people who live in a very different world, who have never cleaned a toilet, and who will never clean a toilet, that's how they get to appreciate his life. And that's why, in a strange way, Perfect Days is really a little bit of a utopia. This man lives a utopian life, even if it ain't much. He doesn't go buy 3 books, he only goes buy 1 book. And he doesn't have a lot of music, but when he listens to one piece, it's the world for him. And it's a new invention of the world. So, that's why I continue liking movies, because each one is a new invention of the world. I hope that remains the same.